everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Fallon, and today I'm going to be talking about my starting out with my challenge to myself to use up some of the fabric that I have on hand, particularly my scraps this year. So if you remember from last year, I talked about some books I purchased for making scrap quilts. And I actually decided to start with the book called Oh Scrap. This book is by Lissa Alexander, and one of the main reasons I chose to start with this book is because a lot of the quilts in it really had a scrappy look to it, so I felt like I would know more what my quilt would actually look like in the end. So I chose a pattern from this book. You can see I have a lot of tabs on here, and I used these markers that are plastic that I got from my Jenny's Countdown to Christmas box in each of these books to show the quilt that I really wanted to start with first in each book. So I chose this quilt in the background. It is called Firecrackers inside of this book. I think the name is really fitting. I absolutely love how it turned out. I really think it looks really good. It was hard to let go and be okay with the background looking so different and having a lot of different tones of the cream and white that I used. But I think it worked out in the end. I really am happy with it. I do want to talk about the book and the pattern a little bit. It was really challenging for me to cut out all of the fabric needed for this quilt. I honestly wanted to just stop because when I have yardage, I can cut that really easily. I can lay it all out, cut a bunch at one time, but using scraps, a lot of time I was cutting one little square at a time, and it was really time consuming. When I kind of got to that point, it was really a struggle for me to want to continue. It was really time consuming, and I was really excited about this pattern, so it kind of surprised me that I didn't want to keep going on because I really wanted to see how it turned out based on the photos in the book and everything like that. Also, in this pattern, it takes a ton of cuts. So if you look at the quilt back here, some of the blocks are larger and that was really quick to cut, but the half square triangles, you need about 800 of them. So I needed 400 background colors and 400 of the red and blue you see. That's a lot of cuts, and I started really not wanting to even count them anymore. I got to a point where I just hoped I had enough, and I didn't even put the border on because there was supposed to be a border of half square triangles around the border with the background in the blue or red. And I ended up just not doing that because I didn't have enough already cut to do it. And I didn't have enough of the colors anymore at that point either to really get them in a really good layout. I only had a few reds left and mostly blues, but they were the same two colors, so I just didn't think it would work anyway. So now let's talk about the pattern. I think it was really well written. It was really easy for me to follow everything. I don't think anybody would have any trouble whatsoever following it and recreating this quilt. Mine is pretty much really similar to the one in the pattern. I went with the red, white, and blue scheme, but I think it would look nice with other colors as well if you're looking for something else. I do like that the book had kind of one of the hacks for creating half square triangles where you put the background and one of the colors right sides together, draw a line down the center diagonally, and then sew along each side, cut to trim. I did, because the measurements in the book were in 7/8 increments, I just rounded up. I learned from my American Glory quilt adventure that I do not like cutting at 7/8. So I did adjust that, but I mean, it's very minute, that amount of fabric. I didn't find that that changed whatsoever, anything in the pattern, because I still trimmed all of them down. So after all of the cutting, to save time, I ended up not actually marking corner to corner on any of the squares. I used diagonal seam tape instead. I believe the one I use is from Cluck Cluck Sew, but I did see there are some others out there. That just helped me speed up after all of the cutting that I had to do. I really wanted to get through the half square triangles as painlessly as possible. So I used the diagonal seam tape on my sewing machine, and then I also chain pieced all of those. So I sewed along one side of all of them, turned them all and sewed along the other side just to speed that up. I feel like when you're making a quilt, if you do everything all at once, like all of your cutting, get all of that done. If you need to make half square triangles, get all of those done at one time, then cut them, press them, you know, whatever you need to do it all in kind of clusters. So after I got all the half square triangles sewn, I cut them all in half, pressed them open, and then I used my new trimming tool, the Tucker trimmer tool, to trim all of the half square triangles down to the size I needed for the pattern. So I'll go ahead and show you how to use that trim tool. I really, really like it. And then we'll talk more about the rest of the assembly of the quilt. And now we're going to take the Tucker trimmer and we're going to use the half circle side because we're trimming this down to 2.5 inches. And what we're going to do with this one is, you see this center line going down the diagonal of the block? We're going to line that up on our seam. And then we're going to really make sure that we have some excess fabric along all sides with our seam lined up there nicely. Why? Because if we start trimming too far down here where we don't have this dotted line, well, sure, our center line's lined up nicely, but we're going to be trimming off too much here and not have any extra on the other side to trim it down perfectly. So we want to keep this center line lined up nicely, but make sure we have some excess fabric for our initial cut around all sides. So it looks like I'm lined up nicely. So I'm going to trim here and trim here. And then I'll turn. And now I can make sure, since I know these two sides are perfectly trimmed, I can make sure that dotted line is lined up along both sides. Make sure our center line's lined up, and then I'm going to trim both sides. So now we have another perfect half square triangle. That is so. After trimming all of the half square triangles, which really took a lot of time, I was ready to start kind of putting some of the blocks together. So there's actually main blocks here in this quilt. So the blocks are kind of making another, what appears to be a half square triangle. There's one half here that's all the background, and then the other side has the half square triangles all facing kind of the same direction. And then you have some other blocks here to fill in. I cannot remember how many of those I had to sew, but you can see that the final blocks are pretty big. They're finished at 24 by 24 inches. And there are 3 different blocks that I made in this quilt. So there's one that has kind of a square in the center that is made up from the half square triangles that are red and blue. And then there's one that's kind of all the background in the center, creating the diamond. And then the star that I don't really know how to explain, but you can see that there's 3 different blocks that are made up here to create the stars. I actually changed that. There was only one that was supposed to have 3, or maybe there was 2, but one of them was only going to be 2 of the blocks, and then one that I didn't use. So I didn't really like the way it looked with so many different blocks. So I decided to change the layout of that. I did do a lot of rearranging when I had the initial block. I changed it around a bunch to see if I did like that layout of the 3 different final blocks, no, 4 different final blocks, and I chose to go this route. In the pattern as well, it didn't have all of these squares the same. It had, I think, 1 red and 3 blue. I changed that to have them all be the same. I kind of wish I made that scrappy as well in the end, but I already had everything cut for it, and I made that decision early on, and I really didn't have much red left from the initial quilt, and I didn't want to pull something in last minute. Otherwise, after getting it all finished, I am kind of more excited now about doing another scrappy quilt, but it was really challenging doing all those initial cuts. That was really the hardest part for me, was cutting from all of my scraps. Having just small little pieces and only getting 1 or 2 blocks out of it was really, really frustrating and very time consuming. So I did end up looking around on the internet, and I found this book. It is Adventures with Leaders and Enders by Bonnie K. Hunter. I actually saw someone talking about this on the Cotton Cuts Fabric Facebook group, and so I went and grabbed it, and I really like how she talks about rearranging scraps. So I am going to start doing that as I cut my my fabrics, my yardage for other quilts. When I have scraps left over, I'm going to start cutting them down into the suggestions that she made and just organize them that way, so that if I want to make more scrappy quilts in the future, I already have some fabrics cut down and organized. So I will be at some point talking about this book some more when I do more scrap quilts this year, and maybe showing how I'm organizing my fabric a little more according to this book. So this really has me excited. I am still going to try to get to these other 2 books that I initially showed, because I do have some quilts in here already picked out. So I'll let you know how those turn out. But let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think of how this quilt turned out? Are you going to grab the book and make a scrappy quilt this year? Do you have any plans for that? I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.